Hey everyone, before we get to today's shows, I just want to ask you for your support. The UCAN Foundation has partnered with MoveOn.org to launch a petition that demands that Netflix and other reality shows put a disclaimer on the front of all unscripted shows. And that disclaimer says that all episodes are for entertainment purposes only, and any content can be edited, manipulated, and presented in any other way for storyline purposes. So please, if you can, check out the link in the description right here. Go add your name to support, and let's get this petition out to Netflix and start making some real change in the industry. Thank you for your support, and thank you for your signature. Now, let's enjoy the show.
I kind of learned as a child that if I was perfect and seemed like I had everything together and was happy all of the time and excelling in these different areas, that would help my mom feel better. She was really not able to manage the moments when I myself and my brothers were going through something difficult. It was really hard for her to cope with. So I learned, okay, well, I've got to really keep things in check and make it seem like everything is all good. And so that really manifested later on in life in terms of me trying to always be perfect so as to not ruffle any feathers.
Are you going through life blind? This is Eyes Wide Open with Nick Thompson. On this podcast, we share knowledge and stories that build human connection while elevating stigmatized societal issues such as mental health, holistic wellness, culture, free speech, and more, all to ensure we show up in the world with our eyes wide open. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Eyes Wide Open. Before we get started today, make sure you like, subscribe, share. All of those things help us in the algorithm and help the show grow. Our guest today is Gianna LaLota, and she's a licensed mental health counselor and specialist in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, as well as several other ones that we'll talk to. But what I really wanted to have Gianna on today to talk about was mindfulness, because I think when you look around into social media, especially, but in the world, everyone's talking about being mindful, right? Practicing mindfulness. And I feel like there's a little bit of a muddying of the waters on what being mindful actually means and what mindfulness looks like when it's applied to your everyday life. And I think with the way I've heard Gianna talk about it and explain it before, I really wanted to invite her on so that we could talk about the importance of being mindful, what that really means, what role that plays in your perfectionism and your self-criticism, and how can you turn the negatives into a positive. Do you want to go through life mindless, where you're just endlessly scrolling on social media and always wondering what's coming next and not paying attention to the world around you, which aligns very much so with the theme of this show? So I invited Gianna to come on. I'm excited to have her on. And again, she's a licensed mental health counselor. She specializes in CBT, and she also is a certified yoga instructor. So we'll talk a little bit about how all of this plays into it, as well as dive into her history a little bit. How did she become a therapist? How did she decide that was what she wanted to do? It's a very interesting, very fun conversation, including her sharing, her experiences with perfectionism. So I hope that listening to this, we can learn a little bit about mindfulness, learn a little bit about Gianna as a person, and that this will help you go through life not mindless, but mindful, with your eyes wide open. Please welcome our guest today, Gianna LaLota. Gianna is a licensed mental health counselor who specializes in CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, trial-based CBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, which is DBT, and mindfulness, which we'll get into that today. She's also a certified yoga instructor and a level 2 Reiki practitioner. Welcome to the show, Gianna. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and happy to chat today.
Me too. So I actually, I know you know this, but I heard Gianna on Rachel Wright's podcast, The Right Conversations, who Rachel Wright's a show alum. So she's been a guest on this show, and I will be a guest on hers soon. But thank you for getting me introduced to you by going on her show, I guess.
Yeah, Rachel's awesome. I had so much fun connecting with her. I'm so excited you'll be on her show too. I'll have to listen to that once that's out.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm excited too. When she was on my show, I'm actually going to have her on again because we didn't talk about any of the things we wanted to talk about. We ended up talking about the ultimatum queer love and some of the abuses that she saw watching that as, a queer person. So it was very interesting. It went a total different direction. So we're going to actually get at it again sometime soon. But today, let's talk about you and your expertise. So before we get into that, I always like to ask my guests, what did you want to be when you were a child and growing up, and how did that evolve to where you are today?
hmm Yeah, when I grew up, I wanted to be an actress, actually. So I grew up performing. I always loved theater. I did a ton of shows throughout high school. And once I got to college, I was a psychology major, but I actually minored in theater because I loved it so much. So I think when I look back, actually, that makes a ton of sense because my favorite part of acting was always getting into the headspace of a particular character and understanding what the character's story was. And so, now as a therapist, that makes perfect sense to me because my favorite part of my job is getting to pick people's brains, understanding people's stories and like why they are the way that they are. And then now I think like the performance element of doing theater, I still get to do through doing like speaking things like this, which I always really get me super excited.
That's awesome. That actually does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that for me, I realized I wanted to be a therapist after I graduated undergrad, and it took a little bit of time for me to figure out that path. But now that I am where I am, looking back in retrospect, like all of the pieces really fit together in a way that makes a lot of sense.
CBT, please. Why
Mhm.
CBT? Why is that a good form of therapy, and why are you happy to practice that?
Yes. So I specialize in CBT. So CBT stands for cognitive behavioral therapy. And the way that I typically explain it to clients is that CBT is all about the way in which our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors are all interconnected. So it's about the relationship between each of these things and how they really influence one another. In addition to that, I think the major difference between CBT versus more traditional talk therapy is that CBT is a lot more hands on. It's a lot more skills and tools based, meaning that there's a ton of different techniques that I teach clients. And that's really what I love about it. I find it to be like such an empowering form of therapy because I'm
Mm.
teaching clients things that they can actually put into practice in their day to day and then see the changes that happen as a result. So that's really what I love about it.
I think that's really cool because then you actually get to track progress in a sense and see how somebody's changing their behaviors over time and then building upon that. It's got to be something pretty fulfilling to see.
Yeah, absolutely. That's another difference between CBT versus traditional talk therapy. So, a part of my work with my individual clients and my group clients is that at the start of working together, we'll always create specific treatment goals. So, having those on paper and then being able to reflect back on those as time progresses is really powerful and also just supports the growth that clients make, like being able to look back 3 months later, 6 months later, and see how far they come is very encouraging. And it also allows me as the therapist to make sure that I'm helping them in the best way that I can because it helps me understand like what they're really looking to gain from the process.
That's so good. And also balancing balancing, sort of a, I don't know, I forget what you called it, but goals, balancing the goals and being able to track those is beneficial because I feel like in the limited knowledge that I have of different types of therapy, like traditional talk therapy focuses almost a lot on like your past. Is that fair to say? And this
Mhm.
is focusing on like what can you do in your present to better your behaviors.
Yeah, exactly. That's a key difference as well. So I always say more traditional talk therapy is like insight oriented, really trying to gain insight, gain awareness, understand patterns, connect the dots. And then CBT is really great in terms of being able to like make change. So I definitely invite in conversations about clients' past because I would be remiss not to do that. But the emphasis, you're totally correct, is more on present day.
Which I think is a good reason that you probably became an expert in mindfulness, which is one of the topics that you talked about on Rachel's show that really caught my attention because I know, I'm in the, dare I say, public figure space, and I see and interact actually with a lot of wellness coaches, or I have friends that are dating coaches and all sorts of different um, areas where mindfulness is the biggest buzzword that there is, and everybody seems to take sort of a spin on it that sometimes I'll read a post or see something on social media. I'm like, no, if that's actually what mindfulness should mean. So
Uh,
in your view, and
uh,
I think I did write down here really quickly the Oxford definition, which is
mhm,
the quality or state of being conscious or aware of something, or number two is a mental state achieved by focusing on one's awareness on the present moment while calmly acknowledging and accepting their feelings, thoughts, bodily sensation, and it's used as a therapeutic technique.
mhm,
So how do you, and again, if it's against Oxford, whatever, Oxford's old, but
uh-huh.
in your view, what's mindfulness? How would you define it, and why is that important to someone's overall wellness?
Yeah, so my definition of mindfulness is really informed by how mindfulness is talked about in DBT. DBT is dialectical behavior therapy, so another form of behavior therapy. And one of the major modules of DBT is mindfulness. So in DBT, we talk about mindfulness as a present moment awareness. So being aware of what's going on internally within ourselves as far as our thoughts, our body sensations, our emotions go, but also cultivating that awareness externally as well, recognizing what is going on around us. And I always emphasize the importance of non-judgment in that definition as well. So if you're noticing what's going on internally and externally, that's great. But if you're judging that experience, that's not
Mm,
noticing it in a mindful way. So, mindfulness is noticing with acceptance and non judgment. And I find that's often the trickiest part of really being able to put it into practice. And the way that I infuse it in my work with my clients is I really start out with mindfulness. I don't think that people can be successful in CBT unless they're mindful, right? Because CBT relies on us being able to identify our thoughts, our emotions, our behaviors. If we're just on autopilot going through life unconsciously, we're going to be totally unaware of those things. So it first starts with cultivating, like I call it like an inward awareness or mindfulness first. And then we can dig into the CBT for the work after that.
right. That's so true. And it's part of the point of my show is called Eyes Wide Open because I feel like a lot of people are on autopilot. And I know you recently had a post on social media. It was,
Mm-hmm.
do you want to go through life mindful or mindless? And it had them compared
Mm-hmm.
to each other. So when you work with your clients and you start teaching about being mindful and the non-judgmental phase, which I think is, you know, that resonates a lot because I think we are our own harshest critics. And
Mm-hmm.
when we're our own harshest critics, we're also others' harshest critics.
Mm-hmm.
And so how does the non-judgmental thing impact people? Like, do you have any examples that you could share?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. So I work with, I'll say, a number of clients that deal with intense emotions as a therapist. That's not unusual, right? Like people have intense emotions and maybe difficulty regulating those. And so when I'm working with clients on like a mindfulness of emotions exercise in particular, and we're inviting in whatever emotion is present in that moment, if they're judging that emotion, it totally keeps them stuck, right? It's like the more that you resist it, the more you stay stuck in whatever that emotion is. But if you're able to just recognize that that emotion is present in the moment, not attach a storyline to it, not judge it or judge yourself for feeling that way, it helps you move through it with so much more ease, so much less resistance.
That's so true. Oh man, the storyline or the narratives that we attach to our feelings are just brutal. That's something I learned a while ago, several years ago now. But I've had I was diagnosed with depression in my early 20s, but I had the feelings back when I was a kid, and I didn't know what it was. And it wasn't until I could like separate myself from that, like Nick is the person who's feeling that in the moment, and then Nick is the person who isn't going to feel this way all the time, and that does not define me. Then the things that I do in my everyday life are going to be what define me or be my, my personal legacy. And it's been it's a game changer because, I used to have days where I couldn't get out of bed. I don't have those anymore, because I can separate it. I know that if I do X, Y, Z, if I think about it in a different way, it's not going to linger the way that it typically used to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's so powerful, right? And you mentioned like your early 20s as a time when you were first able to identify that that was something you're struggling with. And that makes a lot of sense because your early 20s and your 20s as a whole, I think, are filled with so many various transitions. So it can really bring a lot of like mental health related concerns to a head for people. So I work with primarily young adults, some exceptions to that, but I love working with people in their 20s or who identify as young adults in particular, because it's such a difficult time, right? Filled with so many transitions. So it makes sense that that was like a difficult period for you, but I'm so happy to hear like you have come so far, it sounds like.
Took me a long time, but thank you.
Yeah.
That's what I think is, I think it's some people who haven't started their therapeutic journey or their experience yet. I think they think, and I've talked to specifically other men in my life that I've either worked with or have worked, under me. And a lot of times they're almost expecting like if I go to therapy, it's going to be like 2 sessions and I'm good to go. And it's like, it's not. It takes a long time to build on these behaviors and retrain your mind that's been trained all the way up. If it's, your early 20s, you've trained your entire life up to that point to think and behave in a certain way. So it's, it is one of those things where you have to be patient, you have to find the right therapist, and you have to really give yourself some leeway to or runway, I should say. Give yourself some runway.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear that so often from new clients that I work with, that they have this expectation that CBT is something that can help them overnight, right? And I think like when we have that expectation, we're not doing ourselves any favors because we're not allowing the process to unfold naturally and to really give it the time that it requires. So I'll always say to clients, like, the patterns that we're working on undoing were not created overnight. So we can't expect for them to change overnight. And I do think that is also one of the major misconceptions that I often hear about CBT in particular compared to other forms of therapy. There's this belief that it is only intended to be used in the short term. And I think that has to do with a lot of the clinical research that's done on it, because a lot of the research will be done and the studies are, let's say, maybe 12 weeks long, right? And that's just the nature of how some of these studies are designed. But in reality, when we're thinking about like the practical application of CBT, it can be used long term. I have plenty of clients that I've seen for, a number of years, and we still utilize it. The way that we incorporate it into our session maybe is different, but it can certainly be used long term. And like, those are my favorite type of clients to work with, the ones that I have seen grow over 2 years, 3 years time. And then by that point, our relationship is so solid that only like further adds to the power of the work that we're able to do together.
That's so cool to hear. And I think, from your perspective and the point of building that relationship, it takes time. People sometimes give me crap for this almost, but like I've been seeing my therapist for like 6 years now, the same one.
Yeah.
And it ebbs and flows. Sometimes I go every week, sometimes I go once a month. It's where are we at? But having that long-term relationship, it builds a level of trust that you don't get overnight. And just because someone's a therapist doesn't take away the humanity that each of you have and the connection that you have to make to be able to trust one another.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, my relationship with my clients is the most important part of what I do, right? Beyond my expertise in these different modalities, like my ability to connect and form relationships is the foundation of all of the good work that we're able to do together and the progress that we're able to make. So that's my favorite part of my job.
Another thing that I've seen you talk about on social media and again on Rachel's podcast was the self-criticism piece. And you yourself have declared that you are a recovering, and these are my words, not yours, recovering perfectionist, right? And perfectionism is grounded almost in this criticism of yourself for not being perfect. So what is your personal experience being, a perfectionist, and where are you now, and how do you manage that? Where'd you come from? How'd you get there?
Yeah. Well, I always love talking about this. It's something that I work with a lot of clients on and have a lot of my own personal experience with. So I think my perfectionism roots back to when I was really, really young. I grew up in a household where there were people struggling with mental health, right? So, particularly my mom. And I kind of learned as a child that if I was perfect and seemed like I had everything together and was happy all of the time and excelling in these different areas, that would help my mom feel better, right? So she was really not able to manage the moments when I myself and my brothers were going through something difficult. It was really hard for her to cope with. So I learned, okay, well, I've got to really keep things in check and make it seem like everything is all good. And so that really manifested later on in life in terms of me trying to always be perfect so as to like not ruffle any feathers, just kind of keep things calm, not muddy any waters there. So that turned into trying to be the perfect student, always excelling at school, trying to always look perfect, act perfect, be perfect within relationship. So as just to keep things steady and constant, and really just to like maintain calm, especially within the household, recognizing that like if things were not going well for me, my mom couldn't cope with that, right? It was hard for her to see. I was like, I'm all good, but putting on that front for years and years really like took a toll. So it's something I really had to do a lot of work on. I had to recognize like that perfectionist part of me is not bad. It really served a purpose, especially at the time when I was really young. And the way that I've been able to shift that is through changing behaviors. So making behavioral changes and doing these little behavioral experiments and learning that it is safe and okay to show up in a messy and imperfect way and to make mistakes. And I no longer have to worry about how that might impact someone else. That's on me now to just work through that on my own and be okay showing up like messy and just as a human, right? Like
Right.
perfectionism makes you present yourself like a robot, and
Right.
that's like boring, right?
Oh, nuance.
There's no nuance. People don't relate to that either. So I'm at a point in life now and at a stage where I'm just trying to learn that it's okay to show up imperfectly and like honestly intentionally do things less than 100%.
Smart. That's actually, I relate to your story so much personally, but like I had no idea that I had perfectionist tendencies until recently.
Mhm.
And even today, I was resharing, I think it was last week's podcast guest. He tagged me, so I went to reshare it. And I spent a good 3 minutes trying to get everything perfectly aligned. And I'm like, what am I doing?
Mhm.
Like this is a reshare. It's like on
Yeah.
Twitter, there's like a retweet button and you're done. Like, why
Mhm.
am I like overthinking this? Why am I worried that everything is lined up correctly? So I think it's something a lot of us experience that we may not even realize in our day-to-day life, the things that we are doing
Mhm.
to try and be perfect, to try and keep the calm when in reality there's a little messy going on.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. It'll show up in little ways for me still, and uh for my clients as well. Like I work with a number of clients who, like yourself, you just said you have perfectionistic tendencies, but it wasn't even something that you were necessarily aware of. And I think the tricky thing about perfectionism, especially, is that it is rewarded societally, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we are rewarded when we quote unquote seem perfect, or we set these extraordinarily high standards and we meet those. But I think the debilitating nature of perfectionism and really just the toll that it can take on people internally is what is less
Mm.
understood.
Very, very well said. Very well put. So, where does self compassion play into that? Because if you are constantly forcing yourself to be perfect or try to be perfect in
Yeah.
every asset that you're participating in your life, how do you show yourself compassion for the messy? Why is that so important to do?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I think first that starts by recognizing that the perfectionism is not your true self. You can think of it instead as like a part of you. So, your true self really is compassionate. So it is about like tapping into that energy and then meeting the perfectionistic part of you from that place. So rather than trying to get rid of that perfectionistic part entirely, it's about greeting it gently, right? Recognizing like that it is serving a purpose. It's been doing the best that it can to try to help you for so long, but that maybe it's not serving the same purpose anymore. So you can kind of meet that part with some more compassion and really visualize like these two parts of yourself, that true self that is compassionate, and then this perfectionistic part, maybe that looks like a younger version of yourself, or something that represents perfectionism to you in your mind, and let this part know like, hi, I appreciate you, I see what you're doing, I understand the purpose that you're serving, but it was never your job to have to be perfect all of the time. So if you're willing to like let go of any of that role, you're you're free to do so, and you can actually go be an inner child and run around and play and explore. And I, as the true self, am going to be the one to manage these present day situations. It's
Mm.
not your job to have to do that.
That's again just so clarifying, and just sort of separating yourself from that and realizing that it's a new season for you and you can do that.
Yep. And self-compassion is I think, along with mindfulness, one of my favorite things to talk to clients about. So, whenever I wrap up with a client and I ask them about like what they really gained from our work together, I always love when they tell me that through our work, they've been able to treat themselves with more compassion, more kindness, and just be more gentle. I think ultimately, like that's, like lights me up so much to hear that, because I see, right? Like all of these people, all these clients I work with or people I know personally who just are so harsh on themselves, and they're just used to treating themselves in such a harsh way. So to be able to hear that, like that is something that people get out of their work with me, I love that so much.
That's amazing. Um, I also quickly, well, not necessarily quickly, but I want to touch on the role that yoga and Reiki play in your approach to therapy and your approach to self-care.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So I first started practicing yoga when I was about 16 or 17. So I was still in high school at the time. Wasn't really cool then. No one that I knew, no one that I knew anyway was really practicing yoga. And it's really exciting for me to see how much more common it is now, like how many people do practice it. So I would say I practiced yoga and got very into it for about 5 years until I became a teacher myself. So I did a teacher training through Yoga Works, which was so powerful. Like I credit so much to that. And then it was about a year later then that I became certified in Reiki. My first experience with Reiki was in a restorative yoga class, and it just like opened my heart right up. So for anyone who doesn't know, Reiki is an energy healing modality. So it works with the chakra system in the body. So I don't infuse Reiki into my therapy work. I haven't ever offered Reiki to clients. I really became a Reiki practitioner to practice self Reiki just for me to incorporate it into my own personal healing practice. So it's something that I really do daily, and I'll do it like between sessions and at the end of the day as a way to kind of clear my energy and ground myself back in my body. That's super important. I call it like energetic hygiene. So as someone that works with so many people throughout the day, I pick up on a lot of people's energies. So Reiki is a really nice self practice for me to be able to clear some of that and get grounded back into my own energy. And then
Love
as
that.
yeah, and then
Yeah.
as far as yoga goes, I would say I'm not doing like an asana practice with clients or anything like that, like the actual physical poses and postures that we typically think about when we think about yoga. However, I incorporate a lot of the other limbs of yoga into my work. So
Mhm.
breath work and self-study and meditation and mindfulness. That's how I currently infuse like yoga and yoga principles into my work.
That's really cool. I'm a yogi myself.
Yeah.
It's funny too because it took me forever to. I started doing it at home probably like 10 years ago, like
Uh-huh.
online courses and stuff. It took me forever to be able to do it in front of other people. But
Okay.
it was yeah. I mean, I love hot yoga. I haven't done it in a while, but
Uh-huh.
although I do yoga on my rooftop sometimes. So in Chicago,
Oh.
it does get pretty hot up there. But yeah,
Uh-huh.
it's a yoga is it's a life changer. Just the principles themselves, as you pointed out, can really help. I think anyone just be mindful, be in the moment.
Mhm.
Focus on how you're moving your body. What needs to move more, what is moving
Mhm.
just the right amount. So yeah, I absolutely love that. So thank you for sharing so much and actually getting a little personal with your experience with perfectionism specifically.
Mhm.
Before we go, is there I'd like to give everyone a ask me anything opportunity. Is there anything that you want to ask me or you're curious about?
Mhm. Yeah. Um, I'm curious to hear a little bit more about like what some of your favorite topics are that you've spoken about on the podcast and like the types of conversations that really excite you and light you up when you're talking to guests.
Yeah, no one's asked me anything close to that. That's a good question. So I like talking about mental health. And one of the big reasons, and one of the reasons I wanted to chat with you, is because I do obviously see the stigmas and being, male and my experience growing up and not knowing what it was and not being able to talk about it.
Mhm.
And I grew up Catholic and went to a Catholic school, so it was very much a just trust God has a plan for you type of
Mhm.
mode that you get sort of embedded in your mind. So, being free, and by the way, I never told anyone that I suffered from depression until a few years back. So that took me a very long time to feel comfortable even telling anyone with.
Mhm.
So I know that I feel a responsibility having, somewhat of a platform to
Mhm.
try and use that to normalize it and normalize it for men, normalize it for anyone really. And
Mhm.
that I've experienced significant benefits from my therapeutic journey, just from being mindful, of course, changing the way that I think about things. And I also believe in toxic positivity. So it's not always about being positive all the time. It's okay that things go wrong, but just knowing
Mhm.
that, basically this too shall pass
Mhm.
is become something I just want to help spread and share.
Mhm.
I'm a very nuanced human being. So like
Uh-huh.
I love talking about like the news and politics and current events and free speech and where we're heading from a cultural society perspective. So I'm a little all over the place on that. And then I also like to so I'm trying to organize other reality TV cast members to unionize and get some,
Wow.
yeah, basic human rights. And
Yeah.
I have a not-for-profit foundation dedicated to providing mental health and legal services to reality cast members, because
Mhm.
there ain't any in the industry. You
Mhm.
are bullied by lawyers and not given any mental health support while they
Mhm.
exploit you for profit. So
Yeah.
I have guests from different shows that want to come on and share their story, whether it be from a mental health impact or and sometimes it's really just they got a bad edit, or they
Mhm.
are or they went through something after the fact and
Mhm.
never had any support, or how being in the public eye influences their mental health, because people on the internet are mean and
Mhm.
get there. Everyone is so polarizing these days
Yeah.
with every thought. So those are a few of the things I like to talk about.
Mhm.
I just really stigmatized issues and bring people together to show that like we're all human beings first. We're all kind of we're all going through something, but we're all kind of closer and more connected than
Mhm.
we think, because we watch the news so much, or because we engage so much online and we don't really see the human connection that we all actually have.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting to hear you talk about your experience with reality TV and navigating life post that experience. How was that transition for you? Was it more or less challenging than you were anticipating?
Really good question too. Wow. So it was both, ironically, because I felt I was going to be okay because I was very confident in myself. I
Mhm.
have good, strong values that I live by. I don't really, and this is a learned behavior. I used to be very snarky, sarcastic, and reactive. So,
Mhm.
and that's how my family is, to be quite honest. Very
Mhm.
reactive, constant states of anxiety. So I wasn't worried about the hate, right? What I guess surprised me that I wasn't ready for was the level of investment that people make into you, or in my case, into my relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that it got to the point at one time where I couldn't go, when I had a separation and subsequent divorce, I couldn't go out with friends without people starting rumors that, I was a cheater, or
Mm-hmm.
because God forbid a male have female friends, right? And
Yeah.
it's just stuff like that, and the investment of people thinking that they know you or they know your relationship when in reality they don't. And I guess you hear these stories, but experiencing it, that was kind of the part for me where people are so invested in this that
Mm-hmm.
they don't even separate what they see on TV versus the fact, again, that you're a human being. And so that
Mm-hmm.
was the part that really was an adjustment for me, and doing a lot of, typically a pretty private person, and doing so many things in the public eye was, um, you know, really tough. And my divorce got leaked by TMZ before I told my friends or family. So
Wow.
people don't understand like how it is to wake up on a Sunday morning and have calls from everyone in your life, your parents, your sisters, text
Mm-hmm.
messages, DMs, like, what's going on? How did this happen? And it's just really difficult to actually understand what you're
Mm-hmm.
getting into from that perspective. And that's what really surprised me the most, I guess, that I wasn't prepared for.
Sure. Yeah, right. Like you don't have any privacy, it sounds like. Uh, I mean, the fact that like major news about your own life was leaked before you got to share it with people who were close to you means that that opportunity got taken from you. You weren't able to deliver that message in a way that you would have wanted to. So I'm sorry that that happened. That sounds like, yeah, that would have been terrible to like see that news about yourself before even getting a chance to share it with the people in your life.
Yeah, thank you for the kind words on that. The the weird thing about this, that whole thing, and I could probably, maybe I'll talk about this another time, but um I I found myself kind of back into this version of myself that I thought was gone, that I thought I grew out of, that I thought
Mhm.
I had course corrected on. And finding myself back actually into that, like being reactive,
Mm.
being defensive, feeling anxious, just walking around outside. I had my first ever panic attack, which I had
Mhm.
no idea was ever going to be in my, in my life, because
Mhm.
I've never experienced that before. So, it's interesting because it does sort of push you to challenge yourself and stay true to the person that you were beforehand.
Mhm. Sure. Yeah. It's fascinating hearing about your experience. I have not seen the show, I'll be honest. So I
That's
haven't
okay.
seen it. Yeah. And I was thinking before we were meeting today, I was like, should I check out a couple episodes? And I was like, no, I want to come in without having any sort of like preconceived notions or even seeing that side of you. I just wanted to get to meet you and just meet you as a human without having to see that.
Well, I really appreciate that. That's a good thing to hear, because and again, I'm me on the show, so it would be the same version that you have here, but coming in clean with your perspective is appreciated. Yeah, thanks again for coming on. Where can people find you?
Uh-huh. Yes. So I share a ton on Instagram. You can find me at Mindful Therapy NYC. And the group practice that I work at is called NYC Cognitive Therapy. So if you're interested in working together, you can search for our practice. It's nyccognitive.com. You can get in touch that way. And those are the two places you can find me.
Are you guys accepting new clients? Because I know a lot of time, and I experienced this too. Therapy during COVID
Mhm.
skyrocketed, which is good, but it's hard
Yeah.
sometimes to find someone who has openings.
Yes, we are. We
Excellent.
are accepting new clients. Not all of the therapists on the team have open spots in their caseload, but there are some of us who do have openings in our caseload and would be available to meet with clients immediately. I will mention that we are only licensed to see clients in New York. So just keep that in mind if you are interested in reaching out.
Great. Thank you so much for coming on again. All of those links will be in the show description, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you so much. This was such a pleasure. So nice to meet you.
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of Eyes Wide Open. If you enjoy the show, the best way to support us is by sharing or dropping a review. For more information and content, check out engagewithnick.com or find me on Instagram at nthompson513. Don't go through life blind. Do the work so you can show up in the world with your eyes wide open.